Hi, I'm Cassandra Gaines, and we'll be going over our case study number 4. A little bit about the client. So she's age 7 with a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, and the behavior of concern that we'll be looking at today is verbal outburst. So defining a verbal outburst, in this case, is very much escape maintained. A little attention, but definitely escape maintained. So we're going to define a verbal outburst as any vocalization at a higher pitch or volume than a normal vocalization that demonstrates a lack of respect for authority or language that is inappropriate for the setting towards an adult, task, or outcomes. So, an example of this for her, a lot of it is going to be that pitch, that volume, right? So, an example for her is some of the phrases actually that she does say. It's not funny. Don't tell me what to do. I'll do whatever I want. I'm not doing that. I'm right. A lot of stuff. Even when she says it's not funny, no one's really actually even laughing. It's just something that she says to try to get somebody to respond to her, so that she can kind of maintain some off task behaviors. But she will go into a lot more. She has a wide array of those different phrases that she would say. But again, it's going to be that level of pitch and volume that we're classifying here, and you're going to see that across many different phrases. Some non-examples, though, of her kind of refusing a task but doing that appropriately that would not qualify as a verbal outburst. And now they're not limited to just these, but a non-example of that is no thank you or I'd like a break. But again, you're going to see the volume and the pitch of her tone and her vocalizations to be much lower and more at her normal rate. So this what we're kind of talking about here is a response class, which is a group of responses that with the same function. So right, she might say a million things. Anywhere from it's not funny to I'll do whatever I want, all really with that same function. And it all kind of meets that same criteria of that verbal outburst. So what we decided to do about that for our intervention is to go along the lines of rule governed behavior, which is a complex package intervention of related positive and negative reinforcement contingencies and rule governed behavior that operate alone together. So, like, there's a lot of different components, basically, what it's going over. But it has to provide both positive and negative reinforcement kind of contingencies at the same time. And so we'll get into a little bit about how that applied to her. So what that rule governed behavior intervention looked like. So this little check-in board that I have up here on the side of the screen, this is actually, it's not her official one, but it is a sample of kind of a similar structure. So her actual rules, so before I get in that actually, the check-in board is what we decided to do. And a contract serves as a response prompt to perform the target behavior and enables effective use of a consequence. So this right here is going to symbol that contract, right? So what we did on that check-in board to allow her to kind of avoid these verbal outbursts and to keep her on track without directly just saying that, we gave her classroom rules. We actually also discussed with a teacher that she was about to transition to about what maybe their classroom rules were going to be in that classroom that she was soon approaching. So these rules are as follows. So we use keep my hands and feet to myself, use an inside voice, talk nicely to others, and follow instructions. All of these things are really incompatible with those verbal outbursts. So those rules really are going to govern that behavior, right? So we utilize this as a method of self-assessment for those rules that should be followed in a classroom. These specifically targeting her problem behaviors, so they were going to be easily transitioned into those more general ones we saw that her teacher was kind of discussing with us. So this quasi-contract tells the client this specific behavior will be followed by a specified and reasonably immediate consequence. Now, what we used in conjunction with that to kind of keep track of her reinforcement schedule, she was already working on a token board system. So we use this in conjunction with that. And again, this isn't hers, but basically the same concept of what we were doing. So she did have actually only 5 tokens. That schedule reinforcement first started when we reset it back kind of to square one when we started the check-in board. And we use a schedule of a fixed interval of 1 minute. So every 1 minute we were doing this check-in with her. And if she was able to check off all of her boxes, which we use a dry erase marker, and she's able to check them off and say, I kept my hands and feet to myself. I use an inside voice. I talked nicely to others and I followed instructions. Awesome. We're going to give that social praise. And then she also received that token. Now, each token would then tell her, okay, I'm this much closer to that reinforcement or whatever it is that I'm working for. Usually it was a big break in our playroom, which had a lot of options for her. She loved free operant or free access. Free operant access. So we then kind of faded that schedule out, right? Within that schedule out, excuse me, not faded, within that schedule out to an F5 5. So every 5 minutes, we would then do that check-in board. We'd go through it. And then once she received all her tokens, she was allotted a break, right? And so really what we're doing overall is really stretching the amount of time between each of those breaks, but still having her follow those same classroom rules. We were able to thin that reinforcement break to every 2 hours then, which was actually really great with her school schedule. So we had to thin it first. Once we transitioned her to school, we also had to thin it even a little bit more, but we'll get to that in a minute. So it's also important to know that delayed consequence can help exert control over behaviors performed hours and even days before if they were associated with and to the verbal behavior linked to the verbal behavior, to the rule, or to interim token reinforcement. So in this case, obviously those token reinforcers. So why was this intervention? It was the most practical to be applied in her traditional classroom setting. And it was also something that she was already on track with. So it allowed us to expand upon what she was already familiar with and being successful with, but really making it more of a self-assessment, self-monitoring situation. We'll get more into that in a moment here. So, like I said, the combination of the token board and check-in allowed us to give reinforcement surrounding the rules that were already in place. And now she was nearing that transition to school, like I had said before. So this was the most practical to be applied in her traditional classroom setting. And it has been proven to work to decrease problem behaviors and increase appropriate social behaviors. The self-monitoring was really just a plus. We weren't really sure if she was going to have a para in class. If the school systems are in the same boat as they are in Indiana from where you're at, it's really, really hard. Teaching is really slim. They are understaffed. They are overworked. So really, it's a stretch to really hope for that. Hope for someone like this client to receive a para throughout the day. So we wanted to make sure that we allowed her every chance to have that self-monitoring process in place, or at least for it to be in a place where she could be aided by maybe the classroom going over the rules or her teacher being able to go over those rules. It's short and quick and easy. But she's very aware of her behaviors and kind of that consequence that follows whether she decides to have appropriate classroom behaviors or inappropriate classroom behaviors. So the outcome of this, it decreased this behavior to an average of maybe one verbal outburst in the week. Again, that was an average, but it really, really limited it, unlike any other intervention that we had tried on her before. Which meant then, since this was a state maintained, her on-task behavior actually increased. It also allowed for a really successful transition to school. And was thinned out to a reasonable reinforcement schedule, although we had to tweak it just a little bit. Once she got into school, we weren't really sure how many recesses they were going to be able to have, and they weren't really able to answer that question during the summer months. So, some of the obstacles that we actually we encountered, the main one really being when we first implemented that check-in board. They're not operational definitions right on that board, right? Like those are the rules they're going off of. But what happened then is we had inconsistent data across different RBTs. So what someone dictates as talking nicely to somebody versus someone else's perception of that, we had to really kind of clarify and almost define each rule. That way we didn't have any of those gray areas for discrepancies. And that was that. It honestly, it allowed that data to really steady out and that trend line to go down. It could have been in the midst of extinction bursts as well. But I think they felt more comfortable running the intervention because it wasn't really as subjective as it had been prior when they had, okay, this is what I need to be looking for. This is what I'm not looking for. And again, with such a large response class, it was really important for us to give those non-examples and those examples because that array is so broad. And with a very wordy, or I guess non-concise operational definition, it really gives a lot more opportunity for that gray area. So we really wanted to make sure that those examples and those non-examples were really in there. And with rule governed behavior, again, it's about perception. So we want to make sure that we are clarifying on every step of the way. And once we did that, things went really smoothly. I think everyone felt more confident. I think the client herself, felt more confident about what she was supposed to be doing and what was acceptable and what wasn't acceptable. And she picked up really quickly after that. So, the reference that I used was our Cooper book. It had some great stuff in there for these concepts, and really made total sense. So, hope you enjoy, and I hope you are well.